In just 4 days, Nancy Mace will become the Congresswoman for the 1st Congressional District. Today, I talk one-on-one with her for the special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Congresswoman-Elect Nancy Mace, welcome back to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Hey, good morning, and thank you for having me again, Quintin, and I hope that you're having a good holiday.
Oh, I am indeed, doing lots of running.
Oh, that's good.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
What's your pace, by the way? What's your mile pace?
You know what? 7-minute mile sometimes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I couldn't do that if I tried.
But you were doing a good job a couple of weeks ago when you were running to the U.S. Capitol there, I see.
I sprinted and was out of breath.
Oh.
So much. It was bad.
So we're going to say no to the New York City Marathon then.
That's definitely not happening.
Well, I wanted to bring you back on Quintin's Close-Ups because obviously you made history last month as the first Republican woman elected to Congress ever from the state of South Carolina. Where are you emotionally?
Well, it's very exciting and humbling, and we pulled off a feat that nobody thought we could do. They thought that it was totally impossible to flip this seat, and we did it anyway. And I remember going to my first week of orientation when the wheels of the plane touched down in D.C. at the airport, and I remember just crying, tears just filling up my poor wet Mace mask that I was wearing on the plane, because I was just so emotional looking back at my life and the ups and downs I've had, the numerous second chances, dropping out of school, being a waitress at the Waffle House, making it through the Citadel, being a single working mom. I mean, all these things that I've had, and to go from that place over 20 years ago to being a member-elect of Congress, it's very humbling. And I take the job seriously, and I just simply want to work hard and do what I said I was going to do. That's it at the end of the day.
At the end of the day, let me ask you a redundant question. What got you from the Waffle House to the United States House?
Well, just working really hard. I mean, I learned some very tough lessons during some very tough times. I learned about the value of hard work. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but if you want to be successful, you're going to need to be the hardest working one in the room. And as much failure as I've had and success at the same time, co-equally, I've had to learn from those mistakes and the decisions that I've made, good, bad, and indifferent. But as long as and I've taught my kids this along the way, but as long as, even when we make mistakes or we falter or we fail, as long as we recognize what happened, we acknowledge the problem, we acknowledge our role in that, and we learn from it, then it's really not a mistake. And that's something of enormous value. But also as a woman, I'm the first Republican woman elected to Congress. Women, whether you're Republican or Democrat, we've been breaking glass ceilings all of our lives. And we do know that in order to be successful, sometimes we have to work twice as hard to be seen as an equal. And so it's very, very humbling and it's exciting. We get sworn in on Sunday, and I'm just really, truly honored to be a part of the most diverse, most inclusive Republican freshman class in U.S. history.
Obviously, you won the race, and now you are a congresswoman from the 1st Congressional District. Mm-hmm. But what mistakes did you make in the actual election that you said, okay, I can do this better here in Congress?
Well, we did a really good job. But for me, as someone who always, I want to be perfect sometimes, and I want to do everything right the first time and not make any mistakes. But, looking back on it, second guessing sometimes, or maybe not moving fast enough on an issue or moving too fast. It was such a quick-paced race. I will tell you, having COVID, I think, when I had it, and I had a pretty significant case of it, was really, really difficult for me as a candidate in the race. I mean, I struggled for 3 months recovering from COVID-19, and through no one's fault. It just was one of those things that, man, how am I going to get through the day? And just really pushing yourself, maybe pushing yourself too hard. Maybe that made my recovery longer. We don't know. We don't know enough about COVID, but there's always going to be ways to be better, be more efficient. I'm the kind of person that I'm pretty hands-on, and I had to let go. When I went from the primary, when I had one paid staffer in the primary, to having 5 full-time staffers in the general election, I really had to let go some of the responsibilities and decision making that I was doing in the primary. I couldn't do that anymore if I wanted to win, if I wanted to be successful. And, and that takes adjustments, just like right now, the transition from being a candidate to being a member of Congress, you have to make adjustments. I can't do everything myself. And that's what a well-trained and a hardworking staff is going to be able to do. And I'm really excited about the people we're bringing on board.
And this might be a silly question, but what were your responsibilities in the primary, and what were your responsibilities during the general election as a candidate?
Oh, well, I mean, as a candidate, I mean, I would come up with ideas on social media or an op-ed. I was writing my own op-eds, generally speaking. And so, as a candidate or as a member of Congress, you just don't have that kind of time. And I love to write. I wrote an op-ed that I would like to run in January at some point. Sunday morning at 4 a.m. because I was up at 4. I get up really early, Quintin, and I was up. I had something on my mind and I wanted to write about it, and I did. And so I know that once I'm sworn in, I'm not going to have that kind of time either. It's the holiday, folks are on vacation, and I had the ability to do that. But I know that for me, that'll be a personal adjustment, allowing my voice to be edited by others, for others to create that voice and everything. And I want to be sure that I communicate in the best I can to my staff so that they can represent my views, my values, and that they know where I'm going to stand on an issue. And so I'm really excited. And that my team, they don't officially start until Sunday, but we're starting our preliminary calls actually this afternoon. And I just want to make sure that I convey where I'm coming from on issues so that they better understand, oh, this is where she's going to be, that they'll know before I know. On an issue. I think it's really important being open in communication internally, but also externally with my constituents going forward too.
What will your voice sound like in Congress?
Well, I've always been an independent voice. I'm a diehard fiscal conservative. I believe in the environment and conservation, being pro small business, pro lowering taxes, pro healthcare, pro, rebuilding our roads and bridges. All those things are very, very important. But at the same time, I also been a staunch independent voice on different issues. And that's going to be really important for me going forward to ensure that those values are reflected, because that's really the first congressional district. We are different. We're fiscally conservative, we're environmentally conscious, and we also have this independent streak. And that is the manner in which I'm going to operate. That's the way I've always operated. That's the way I promised to operate in my campaign. And that is the way I'll operate going forward in the future as well.
And you actually said this too, and I'm being redundant, but there are going to be challenges on both sides of the aisle, particularly when you have an independent streak, and it's how you operate. Yeah. How do you operate with an independent streak?
Well, you do the right thing. There's always an opportunity to do the right thing, and regardless of party. I've had a history of standing up to members of my own party. Even during this transition period, you'll see me in photos or at events, unless I'm speaking, eating, or drinking, in a mask. And in some cases, in a lot of cases, that differs from members of my own party. And so we had, very sadly last night, Loophole out of Louisiana, a member-elect, 41 years old, father of 2 very young children, 3 years and one under 3 years, died of COVID-19 and had no underlying conditions. And so, for me, having COVID-19, having been very ill, I know how serious the illness is. And sometimes I differ on issues like healthcare policy. I choose to wear a mask because that's my freedom. I have the ability in a free country to choose to wear it. The person next to me may choose not to, and that's their right. And so I'm trying to set a good example for my neighbors, my family, my friends, our community. And that's something I've chosen to do. And that's something that sometimes is out of step with members of my own party even.
Yes, ma'am. And let me
for example. Yeah.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Exactly right.
Yeah.
And let me just jump right into it. What single policy position have you taken since you were elected?
Goodness gracious. Well, we've been in transition. So the first half of December was really just doing orientation. And so there really has not been a lot of policy. Once we get sworn in on Sunday, there will be plenty of positions to take going forward. I've continued to talk about Parris Island. That's an issue that's very important, was important during the election, and will continue to be. Filing a bill that protects Parris Island will be the very first bill that I file as a member of Congress. So I've really been focusing on the same subjects and issues that I talked about during the campaign. That's really been first and foremost. I've also been sharing a little bit about what orientation is like, what the process, sharing a lot of behind the scenes. I didn't miss a single class in orientation. It's really important that that I do what I said I was going to do, that I learn everything that I can. The other thing that we've been working on too are committee assignments. And so once Speaker Nancy Pelosi is reelected as Speaker, Republicans will know how many seats they have on which committees. And I've been really fighting hard and advocating behind the scenes, having meetings, doing interviews, writing letters to ensure that I get a spot on our committee that is relevant to South Carolina's first congressional district. Those are the things that really matter right now. And also getting the right staff for this office. I retained my predecessors' caseworkers, which are nonpartisan jobs that really try to help constituents from any walk of life, from any political party. I've done that. And then I've hired my legislative staff, my communication staff, my district director, field rep. So filling those spots right now are also very important. We'll get to the policy literally like the day after swearing in. There'll be plenty to talk about once bills are starting to be filed, once votes are starting to be taken policy-wise. But right now, my focus really is on my constituents. On Monday, we'll start looking at my legislative priorities and what bills I want to file in the first 3 to 6 months of being in office. And the very first bill that I am going to file will be regarding Parris Island. But there are a number of other bills that we'll get to focus on. But also next week, I'll be focusing on committee assignments. So we may not know till the middle or end of January what our assignments are. So I'm really advocating and lobbying very hard on my behalf, my district's behalf, to get on committee assignments that will be relevant to the district. So for instance, transportation infrastructure is my number one committee assignment that I'm trying to get on. I think that would have the greatest impact for constituents in the Low Country. We have the port, we have Boeing, we have Volvo and Mercedes. We have almost, between 35 and 50 people a day moving here, maybe more right now with COVID. I've seen more license plates for New York in 6 months than I have in 6 years. And so we know that Charleston is a top 10 city or metropolitan area for people that are moving out of Democratic-led cities, big cities that have been gravely affected by COVID, and they're moving to other states south, east, or west. And so they're coming here. They're going to Florida, they're going to Texas is another big one, but we're seeing a lot of those folks move here as well. And so that's important to recognize what committees are going to be important to this district. And I believe transportation infrastructure would be number one.
As a matter of fact, the state newspaper, I believe Caitlin Burr said this quote, some of the priorities Mace says she has already identified, including securing COVID-19 relief for small businesses and finding federal dollars to send back in an upcoming infrastructure package to help the district's roads and bridges, which must also contend with frequent flooding. How many businesses have secured COVID so far in your mind? Have you secured?
How many businesses have what?
How many small businesses have you secured money for?
Oh, well, they do that through their banking institutions. So I couldn't tell you. I've had a lot of businesses call, especially during the early part of COVID, and identify banks that they could reach out to in March, April, and May. As a state lawmaker, I was helping small businesses do that or work through it. I know in the last week with the stimulus funding, there were a lot of questions related to PPP and whether or not businesses would be able to write those expenses off, if it would be treated as taxable income or not. There's been a lot of confusion, particularly in the last few days of the fiscal year when so many businesses are making these decisions on how much money they need to spend or save up or pay taxes on, et cetera. There's been a lot of confusion. And so as a state lawmaker and in this transition, I've worked as hard as I can to help find the answers to those questions and get them to the businesses who are asking. But I don't get officially on the job until Sunday. And so a lot of the mail and email that our office or voicemails are getting, they're all being held until I'm officially sworn in at this point. I'm not getting a lot of that because we're in this transition mode and we haven't technically been sworn in yet. So it's very interesting to see how all of it works. But literally like the light switch turns on at noon Sunday when we're all sworn in.
What has the transition process been like between you and obviously United States Congressman Cunningham?
Yeah, it's been great so far. His staff has been very helpful and open. If we had questions, they answer them. They've been great. It's been a very smooth transition process, which is the way it should be. And oftentimes, often cases when this sort of thing happens, it's just not that way. But we're very lucky. We have a good working relationship with his staff, and they've been great to deal with.
What is the unemployment rate right now in the first congressional district?
Well, it's going up and down, but recent statistics have it far below the national average. The last time I looked at it, I think it was hovering just over 4%. Now, pre-COVID, it was just under 2% in the first congressional district. And so we're doing a lot better than other states and other metropolitan areas, just not only as a city, as a metropolitan region, but even as a state as a whole. We've been able to balance safety and health with keeping our economy open. And that's really where the balance should be. There are people whose livelihoods who've been at stake, whose businesses have suffered. But we've done a very good job of balancing that and trying to get people to work. And in fact, there are employers who are seeking employees right now because they don't have enough workers for those jobs. And so we've just done a really good job. We should be proud of where we are. And if you are vulnerable, either by age or an underlying condition, we want to make sure that we continue to protect those people as well.
Let me jump into politics. You said this to the state newspaper. You said this quote,
Yeah.
I've already been told that I'm going to be blacklisted by the upper side and won't be able to get anything done because they spent so much money, millions of dollars to beat me and did not. Where can you find solidarity with the Democrats?
I'm going to try like hell to do that. But being a freshman member of the minority party that presents certain challenges, the problem is both sides do it. And I think when you look at the record turnout of voters in this election cycle, 70 to 75% of voters on both sides of the aisle turned out. It really was a referendum on Congress to work together. And I truly believe that. And so we're going to disagree on 80% of the things, maybe 90% of the things. But what are the 5, 10, 15, 20% of the things that we can agree on to try to work together at least? And which is why I think holding Georgia, the Senate in Georgia, and the Republican majority would be helpful, because that's a check and balance on a Joe Biden presidency and Speaker Nancy Pelosi in the House. We need those checks and balances, and we've got to be forced to work together. And I believe that we're going to have to do that, particularly if Republicans retain Georgia. We're going to need to do that. The American people are asking us to do that.
I know you went to Georgia recently to campaign for the GOP Senate candidate. But let me ask you this, Congresswoman-Elect, how's that pitting the Lowcountry over party?
Well, I think we've got to have a balance of power. I mean, that's what Congress is all about. And having a balance of power with Republicans in the Senate will ensure that the tax cuts that Trump gave us, which spurred an economy unlike any other in decade over decade, that we retain those policies and that they can't be completely reversed. Because if we have a Democrat-led Senate, our taxes are definitely going to go up. We're going to be saddled with more government programs, more government taxes, less freedom, less prosperity for every hardworking American. And it is really important that we have a check and balance in Congress. And that means that in order to do that, we've got to have a Republican-controlled Senate.
Now, you talk about the tax breaks. Let me just talk to you about money. How would you, as Congresswoman, obviously voted for the COVID relief bill in the omnibus?
Right. Well, unfortunately, that bill was riddled with pork. We sent money overseas to countries who don't deserve it. We really ought to put the American people first. There are millions of individuals, families, and businesses who've been totally shut down, who've been out of work for months. Those are the people that we've got to put first. And I support stimulus. I support a relief package that provides targeted relief to those people, those individuals, those families, those businesses that have been gravely affected by COVID-19, by the shutdowns, who have been unable to work. Those stimulus checks, in fact, when they came out in the springtime, and when they go out, I imagine we're going to see this in the weeks ahead, but they're being given being sent to dead people. I mean, they're being sent to people whose income has not been affected in a negative way by COVID-19 at all. And to me, as just a person, not just pretend I'm not soon to be a member of Congress, but when you look at it from the outside, that doesn't seem very fair that you would send checks to people who've not had their income negatively impacted. Now, for those that have been, who are on unemployment, who can't find work, whose income has been affected, absolutely 100%. We should be supporting those individuals and those businesses. But sending money overseas to countries who hate us when our people back home are suffering isn't the way to go. And I don't think most Americans would agree with that.
Would you be in favor of the 600 or would you be in favor of the 2,000?
Well, it's going to depend on who it's going to. I mean, I even look at my standing, and I believe, and looking at reading the bill, that I would qualify for a check. Yet my income wasn't negatively impacted by COVID-19. My income was negatively affected because I decided to run for Congress. And so it's a much different scenario. But when I look at it, I shouldn't be getting a stimulus check, and I will get one. I mean, looking at the way that it's written, whether that's 600 or 2,000. If we're going to do that, we've got to be very targeted with that relief. And unfortunately, Congress wants to be all to everyone and dole out these checks that we just can't afford. We're sitting on $28 trillion of debt right now. We have a deficit that's going to be close to $4 trillion this year. And at the end of the day, we can't afford to do this. And so if you've not been negatively impacted, either your employment earnings, your salary, or your business, you shouldn't be getting a check from the federal government, myself included.
Now, with all that's going on, should we just get 600 or should we get 2,000?
I think it's going to depend on the situation or the scenario. I'm not supportive of $2,000 checks going to everybody. Okay. I'm not supportive of $600 checks going to everybody. Okay. As I said before, if you have suffered from COVID-19, if you've lost your job, you've lost your business, totally different scenario. The government should be helping you. They should be supporting you. And that might be more or less based on your circumstances. I don't think it should be one number per person. I think it would be dependent on the scenario. There's some people who've lost their job for the last 9 months since March. There are people that have been out of work only for a few months. I think it really is dependent on the scenario, which is why having a keen eye for targeted relief and not giving a blank check to everyone, including people who are not citizens, including dead people. I mean, the way that we've gone about this has been irresponsible.
And who else should this target in your mind?
It should be targeted to people who've lost their jobs, who've lost salaries, who've lost work, who've lost income, and who've lost their businesses. Those are the people that need it.
And would you be?
I mean, those checks, Quintin, those checks, whether it's $600 or $2,000, those checks. So, for example, if you making $75,000 this year, that's your normal income. It wasn't negatively impacted by COVID-19. Should those people making 65 grand a year, should they be getting checks? No, they should not, because they were not negatively impacted. Their income wasn't impacted. And that's the fallacy in all of this. We've got to be fiscally responsible. We've got to use some common sense and really be targeted for those folks who need it most. Those are people who are still in unemployment. Those are people who've lost their jobs at least partially this year, or have lost some amount of income or revenue, or have lost their businesses or a portion of their income for their businesses. Those are the people, those are the businesses that should be supported right now with stimulus funding. Not me. I mean, I shouldn't be getting a stimulus check, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to get one, but my income wasn't affected by COVID-19. That's unfair.
Okay. And you talk about businesses. Were you actually in favor of the liability shield for the stimulus package?
100%. I mean, our businesses are seeking liability relief, and we should do that. If you walk into a salon right now, or in some businesses, you have to sign a waiver because people are afraid about getting sued about the spread of COVID, even though it was your individual decision to leave your home and go to a business establishment where you might be at greater risk for COVID. So having some liability protections is something that is warranted and needed.
Let me turn to guns. Are you aware that there are no restrictions on the long gun carry law by chance?
Where it's gonna differ state by state, and in some cases city by city, right? So I haven't done a lot of research on it. I don't know particularly what South Carolina law is. I am a pro Second Amendment person. In fact, just yesterday, I sat in on a concealed carry class because I'm in the process of getting my concealed carry permit, and passed that test with flying colors.
Do you intend to modify the law to protect citizens from inexperienced long gun carriers?
No, I have no intention of doing anything to the Second Amendment. That is a right that was created by our founders in our Bill of Rights, and it is something that should be protected. I do think that there were things that we can do to ensure, and this is legislation that I have worked on as a state lawmaker, but if you look at what happened with Dylan Roof, when he was able to purchase a gun, what that came down to is really our criminal data, our criminal information not being shared or stored in one place or one database. And so when the FBI did their background check It didn't matter if the loophole was 3 days, 5 days, a month. It wouldn't have mattered because Dylan Roof would have still been able to purchase a gun because the criminal information on him was not stored in a single database where the FBI could not access it, and instead had to send out communication to different law enforcement offices and didn't get an answer back, or an answer back within a few weeks. That was the problem with that issue. And I think if we really focus on the things that matter and don't make us feel good, criminal data, criminal information is where it's when we're talking about the protecting the lawful rights of gun owners while also keeping our public and our kids safe.
What criminal data are you looking at right now?
So when I was a state lawmaker, I drafted a law enforcement data bill that would bring together all of the criminal information across the state. So for example, our juvenile justice, our court systems, our state troopers, SLED, our counties, our municipalities, our DNR, all of the information they have or criminal information they have on an individual is stored in a different database. And those agencies or departments don't want to or don't have the ability to share that information with other agencies. Now, SLED has a statewide database that these agencies and departments can, quote, opt into, but it's not required. If we had one single database of criminal information, one single repository where all this information was stored, then within 30 to 60 seconds, we should be able to pull up somebody's information. So when they're going to purchase a gun, we should know if they have a criminal record and how deep it goes. And that is the way to solve that issue. I truly believe in it. It's something I worked on in a very nonpartisan or bipartisan way as a state lawmaker. And that's an issue at the state level that Congress at the federal level, I plan to look at that and see at the federal level what we might be able to do. But in this case, this is there are different powers that the states have. There are different powers that the federal government or Congress has. But this particular issue that I investigated as a state lawmaker and worked on with my Democrat and Republican colleagues is a state level issue, and is something that I hope my colleagues will take seriously and will continue to work on in the future so we can get it done. It really needs to happen. And it protects the rights of law-abiding gun owners and citizens while also making sure that criminals who should not have the right to purchase a firearm don't get that right.
How should you close the Charleston loophole?
What's that?
How should you close the Charleston loophole?
Well, if you were to look at the criminal data and have that information on one place, the loophole would not matter. You'd have that information within a minute. It wouldn't matter if it's 3 days, 5 days, or a month from now. I believe the Charleston loophole, closing that is more of a bright and shiny object that makes people feel good, but actually doesn't make the difference you want it to. And so if you look at my law enforcement data bill, that is a bill I spent a lot of time on, did a lot of research on, and spoke with law enforcement, spoke with my colleagues, and worked on, because that would have prevented someone like Dylan Roof from being able to purchase a gun. If you had all that criminal information in one place, in one database, and you could pull it up in 30 to 60 seconds, then a 3-day, 5-day loophole wouldn't have mattered. You would have had it same day.
Let me turn back to COVID, because obviously you said that was serious illness, obviously after you survived that particular illness. Yeah. What are you proposing to do as far as inoculate school teachers and administrators and prioritizing them at the same time as first responders?
Yeah, so Congress doesn't have a say in who gets inoculated or in what order at this juncture. So that's really being determined by the CDC, by state level officials. The federal government is getting those vaccines to the states. The states are then dispersing them with their own plan. I do believe, as a member of Congress, and I say this publicly, and I'm going to do this, but our frontline workers, those who are most affected by COVID, are elderly. Those who are disproportionately affected by COVID, we know our Black and African American communities get hit harder. They have a more severe reaction when someone does get infected by COVID. Their morbidity rate is also higher. Those with underlying health conditions, all of those groups, all of those communities should get the vaccination before someone who's under 60 and perfectly healthy. So I'm going to wait in line until my constituents can get the vaccination. I will also get it, but I'm going to wait until those more vulnerable populations have access to the vaccination first. And when the normal everyday citizen can get a vaccination is when I will get one as well. It is a serious illness. I had a colleague, Member-elect Luke Letlow, last night died from COVID-19 in Louisiana. just days before our swearing in ceremony. He leaves behind a wife and two very young children. It is a very serious illness for some people and is something that we should take very seriously. I'm optimistic about the vaccinations getting out over the next couple of months, but I want to make sure that it gets to our most vulnerable populations first.
Have you been inoculated?
No, I have not.
Okay.
And I won't until you can get it, Quintin, until until my constituents can get it. I will wait and get it with the rest of them. I don't believe members of Congress should get inoculated before everybody else.
And I know, obviously, you said, hey, you have COVID already, so you can attest to it being a serious illness. But then, why do you need a vaccine?
Well, we just don't know enough about it. They think that I'm immune for 6 to 8 months. It could be longer. It might be less. We just don't know at this point. I hope over the coming months that we have more information on it. But I will tell you, Quintin, I was very sick and I don't want to get COVID-19 again. I don't want to expose my elderly parents to it. I don't want my children to get it. One of my kids had COVID. The other one did not. Right. It's a very strange illness and it does kill some people. And so I'm going to do my part to protect my family and my neighbors and my colleagues. I think that's very important to set an example.
Let me turn to, obviously, President Trump. How are you standing with President Trump?
And Quintin, I've got like 3 more minutes left.
Oh, yeah, I got you.
Got a little bit over. I apologize.
Oh, no worries. I got to get these questions out to the public. But let me ask you this. How are you standing with President Trump now as he's challenging the election results?
Yeah, well, I believe that when we look at history, that we're going to see that there were irregularities, that there was voter fraud, that there were improprieties in the election process. And I support President Trump fighting and filing these cases in the court of law where they belong, which is in those individual states. I think that's very important. We've got to get to the bottom of it because our American way of voting, our voting system is only as strong as the people's confidence in it. I think that's very, very important that if there were irregularities, improprieties, and propensities, or that there was voter fraud, that we know exactly when and where that was so that we can make our voting laws stronger. Most states, including South Carolina, we modified our laws because of COVID-19 for this election cycle. And so I think it's just really important. If you look at South Carolina, Florida, or North Carolina, these states, our state included, did a really good job of making sure that when we modified our legislation, that we ensured that there was not a propensity for voter fraud. You had to have a witness signature on your absentee ballot. We allowed people to vote ahead of time for 30 days in person, 6 feet apart. They could even put their absentee ballot in a drop box. Somehow we were able to manage and do it in a safe, efficient, that minimized the propensity for fraud. We were able to do it. But if you look at some of these other states where they haven't purged their voter rolls of people who've passed away or people who've moved away. There was a federal court judge just yesterday or today made the decision that 2 counties in Georgia couldn't purge their voter rolls. Like, where does that come from? I mean, our voter rolls should be purged of people who've moved away, who've passed away. Those dead people shouldn't be able to vote. I think most people would agree with that. There were some things that were happening, and this was legal in other states where they had mass mail-in ballots. Whether the person passed away or moved away, it didn't matter. Every voter who was registered on those rolls got a ballot. And I think that, that kind of thing, ballot harvesting, those are things that put a wedge in our election system where people do not believe in the confidence of our voting system, our voting laws, or those elections. So those are things that I believe we're going to have to address. But the problem is with Congress is that Congress is the federal government. There are limitations in the authority and the powers invested in Congress versus what the powers are in the states, and that's called federalism. So states write their election law, states enforce their election law, and states select their electors for the Electoral College. And so there is a duality or nuance of powers between the federal government, between Congress and the states, and that also has to be respected.
Now, where is there a path for the Trump administration to overturn these election results?
Well, in the courts with the states that those election laws were held. So in the states where the Trump administration believes there was voter fraud, that's where those cases have to be filed. Now, I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is that if those cases are filed in those courts, that is where they have to be adjudicated. So.
Where is your confidence in the voting system right now?
Well, I think, Congress needs to do some more investigations. I think we need to look into some of these accusations. The decision by this federal judge, who happens to be Stacey Abrams' sister in Georgia, is concerning. But these are things that we need to identify and investigate in Congress. That is one role that Congress can hold going forward, is to ensure that if a court didn't adjudicate it, if there were accusations of fraud, that we should be able to investigate that in one of our oversight committees. And so I think that that should be done, to make sure that people understand, whether that's 2 years from now, 4 years from now, that they have confidence in elections. And I think when we look at the ballot harvesting, the mass mail-in of ballots, not verifying witness signatures on those absentee ballots, and in some cases, I think Pennsylvania was an example where and if you look at New York right now, there are 2 cases right now, and I'll get to that in a second, but where ballots came in after election day and should not have been counted, but they were counted anyway. If you look at New York 22, where Republican Claudia Tenney was up by 21 votes or 12 votes at one point, then somebody found a box of ballots, of a dozen ballots in a drawer somewhere more than a month after the election. I mean, these are things that are real. These are things that need to be investigated. We have an issue in Iowa where the Republican won by 6 votes, and the Democrat that lost is trying to contest it in Congress, and where Democrats may try to seat the Democrat that lost versus the Republican that won, and that election was certified. So there's a lot to unpack over the next couple of days and weeks and even months that will need to be investigated by the states and those courts, but also by Congress. We want to get to the bottom of it and ensure that people know what actually happened and didn't happen, and that and that going forward in the future, it doesn't happen again. So,
and last question, you said this quote: "My body, my choice. I choose to wear a mask." What science are you following right now, Ms. Mace?
What sites?
What science are you following?
Science. Well, I mean, I read everything from DHEC to the CDC to mainstream media articles. I think it's very important that people have the freedom to make that choice for themselves. I don't believe in the government mandating people wear masks. That's a slippery slope. But as a leader in realm and in government, our business leaders, we should all be setting a good example. I had COVID-19. I was very sick, and it took me 3 months to recover. And I would even say now, I would say 1 day a week, Quintin, I still get some fatigue where I get tired and have to rest before I can get through the day, or sometimes I have trouble catching my breath. And I am 5 to 6 months post my diagnosis with COVID-19. This is not a normal illness. It can be very debilitating for some people. And so for me as a leader in our community, I feel it's incumbent upon me to set a good example. And I choose, it's my freedom to choose to wear a mask. And, it's really sad that wearing a mask has been so politicized. And if you look at the science, I've read articles that say that they're effective. I've read articles that say they're ineffective. But if I can carry it around, even though I've had it, and carry it around and give it to someone else, I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that I protect myself, I protect my family, I protect those around me. And then I also set a good example, because if we set a good example, then we'll do a better job of combating and evening out the virus and getting it past us. And this has taken much longer to go through than anyone ever imagined. We never thought we would be here today, but it's incumbent upon me as a leader in our community, to set a good example. And I'd rather people understand that this is a choice. I have the freedom to choose to do this, and that's what I'm choosing to do. It's important to me that I protect myself, my kids, and my family.
Are lockdowns effective?
It's hard to say, but if you look at South Carolina, we've done a really good job of being open, nearly 100% right now. And we are having a surge, but our surge is in places where people aren't wearing their masks. Our surge is in places where people are not social distancing. And if you look at the South Carolina's 1st Congressional District, we've done a remarkable job of keeping our businesses open. The majority of us are wearing masks when we go out. We're being distant. We're being 6 feet apart. We're washing our hands. And so if you look at and it's been probably 2 weeks since I looked at the data, but the rate of COVID-19 in the Charleston area was about 300 or so per 100,000 people. And if you look at other areas the state where we're having this surge. It's at a much higher rate where they aren't doing those things. And it's closer to 1,000 cases per 100,000 people. And so you've got to look at the science. And if you are vulnerable or you're elderly, you should not be out as much. But if you're younger and COVID-19 is not going to affect you as much, then you have that ability to get back to work and be a productive member of society. And that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to balance being at home, being safe, while also working and taking those precautions, which is why I work from home a lot too. And when we have offices, I'll do a combination of working from home and being in office. I think that's important where you can have that flexibility in our businesses in our first congressional district. They've allowed that and done that and continue to do that to make it safe for everybody. South Carolina, when you look at it as a whole, we've done a really good job of staying safe and then keeping our unemployment rates very low. And with that, I love you, Quintin, but
Yes.
I'm like 16 minutes over my time and I am running late, but I love you and happy to come on anytime. Appreciate you and hope you had a Merry Christmas and that you have a very happy New Year.
Congresswoman-Elect Nancy
Okay.
Mace, thank you for your time and
Yes.
welcome back to Quintin's
Of course.
Close-Ups.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
Thank you.